to announce that we have some sponsors that have started sponsoring this event, and I've not approached them lightly because the people that I've sort of want to align myself with, I've been working with for a number of years. So, for example, Wayne at DMI Finance is here this evening. I've been working with him since 2015, 2016, around that period of time. So we're coming up to a good 8, 9 years of working together. We've had lots of different cases, lots of buy-to-lets, commercial. We've had pubs with HMO on the top. And John is here, and he's been to a lot of our projects. We've had commercial deals. We've had land. We've had simple buy-to-lets where we've gone to a lender and said, we want to borrow X amount of money. And some of these we were working through COVID, or Wayne's team were working through COVID, etc. So, as I say, I've not taken bringing people in as partners and people that we would highly recommend to work with, because if it's good enough for me, it's good enough for other people. And we're working with Wayne. Wayne, I do have a couple of slides that I've picked up that you sent to me last week.
I've revised them for you for this week, if that's good.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we can speak to Dan to see if we can get them on, and we can just screen share so that you can then you can do that. And we are recording as well, which is great, because then you'll be able to use that information maybe to do some more TikToks. And if you're not following Wayne on TikTok, do follow Wayne on TikTok, because there's some great information that they're updating on a daily basis. There is also a newsletter that DMI Finance have done, and you can see that in one of the slides that I've got. You can actually join that newsletter and get other information. But I could stand here for the next 2 hours and tell you some of the stories that we've had to go through, some of the challenges of my own portfolio that we've had to go through with lenders because of the types of deals we're doing, or my setup, and all sorts of stuff like that. The good news is that we know I can pick up the phone to the MD here, Wayne, the owner of the company, and he has a team of people, and it's very friendly, and go, okay, look, we're going to sort this problem out together. Wayne, we need this, this, and this. Leave it with me. I'll go and speak to my team. We'll speak to the business manager. We'll do this. We'll do this. And I think without that relationships and those contacts that Wayne's got on his team and his side, it makes it very difficult. So you do need a good broker. And I will just labour this point one more time. There was a period of time between around 2008 and the time that Wayne and I started working together, 2015, 7 years, I didn't actually have a broker. And a lot of the time, yes, I wasn't doing a lot of business buying a lot at that time. But if I needed a broker, yeah, I'd approach people and do certain things. But that meant that the portfolio wasn't getting reviewed on a regular basis. That means that that professional eye wasn't getting looked at over the portfolio, things like that. So one of the things that Wayne and I are both doing, and we do this jointly, is that if you've got a portfolio that needs reviewing, then we can get together either on Zoom or in person, and we can help you with his finance knowledge, property knowledge on our side, and we can bring in our accountants list and really, really look at it. And if you look at your portfolio, really, really look at it, there are opportunities there. So we've had opportunities where we've converted into HMOs. We've taken garages and we've made them into additional rooms. We've built on the side of properties. Again, John has come and done valuations for us, etc., etc. So yeah, loads and loads of opportunities there. But if you need anything in that respect, you want a review of your portfolio from a finance point of view, from a lettings point of view, just reach out and we'll be able to help you with that. I think there's people are still coming in, but Dan is here to help me with that. So I'm going to carry on if that's okay with you guys. And then if you've got any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we can cover those. Okay, just give me one sec.
Have anything?
So yeah, just keep yourselves on mute because it will just help me to focus and concentrate and things like that. So, um, so my name's Sunil. I mean, I know most of you, if you're here for the first time, we've never met. Really, really pleased to see you. I have a portfolio of properties, and this is where I started with a single buy-to-let about 35 years ago, and then that built onto the next one and 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 the next one, etc., etc. And it's nothing really sexy. These are some of our properties which are here, which is 2-bedroom properties. We've got little commercial shops. We've got 4-bedroom houses. We've got portfolio in Citibourne in Kent, some in Reading, Stoke-on-Trent, and we've got, yeah, so buy-to-let buy and hold investments. I need to change that because I have up until now decided not to sell, but I really like saying about the reviewing of properties. I've reviewed a couple of over the last few days and thought I'm always spending money on this property, or it's becoming empty, or it becomes empty. The tenants don't stay more than a certain period of time. So, bit of an issue here. So let's take that money and put it to better use. So apart from the buy-to-lets that I've got, and we do HMOs, don't do serviced accommodation, but HMOs and things like that. Commercial conversions, this is one just down the road, not the corals, above it. We put in 4 flats, built another 3 flats in the back through COVID. Important time, COVID, because the lender who had agreed to lend us money said, no, we need to hold money back, and they stopped releasing funds, but we managed to get out of it. All 7 of those sold. There's some land developments that I'm in. This is one in Newington, just down the road here, again from our offices. There's a bungalow, plot of land, and then a development of 10 with the road here. So the bungalow has now been sold, and we're looking to sell the development out and then move on to the next one. That my properties plus landlord properties. We work for landlords as well, and we have an estate agency called Family Homes here in Citibourne. We cover Kent as our main area, but we will do stuff in other areas. It's important to get a local agent who's going to visit your properties, but from this location, I manage my properties in Stoke, as I say, Reading, Dover, etc., etc. Our main, and then we have a portfolio. We have a team of 10 people managing my portfolio, as well as for other landlords. Wayne, I've got your slides here, but if you want to change the slides, I'm happy for you to do that. Are you okay, Wayne?
Hi, Sunil. Yeah, no, I'm happy to share my screen if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Perfect. Let's share. There we go. Fantastic. I hope you can all see that, guys. Yes, Sunil, thank you very, very much for allowing us to join tonight and to sponsor the event. Guys, for those of you, some of you might know DMI. I don't know if you do, but if you don't, brief backstory is that we've been going for 20-something years. Our speciality is assisting investors. We're almost exclusively an investor-focused brokerage. We arrange all forms of property investment finance, whether that be, as Sunil said, vanilla buy-to-lets, whether it be HMOs, whether it be social housing or serviced accommodation, whether it be title splits or development. We're very, very creative in what we do. We're very well versed in all forms of finance and have very strong relationships. Given our length of trading and our size, we're a team of 10, 11, and our relationships with lenders is very, very strong. I thought today I'd give you a bit of a market update on where things are sat, whether we've had any recent changes in lenders' criteria or in rates. I guess the most obvious thing, guys, is swap rates. As many of you will know, swap rates are the underlying rates at which banks secure fixed rate pricing. They started to drop back towards the latter part of last year. However, over the last few weeks, they've increased. Certainly longer term swaps have increased more than shorter term swaps. We've seen perhaps in the last few days, in the last week, an upwards increase in 5-year swaps of 0.2%. However, guys, the good news is that at the moment, that hasn't really significantly affected the price of mortgages. We've seen some subtle increases, but so too, as I'll come on to in a minute, we've seen some subtle decreases. So we haven't seen any lenders price upwards. I don't think, though, it's likely that we'll see too many price reductions. Guys, you may remember that most lenders' financial year or their kind of performance will start in January. It's a kind of a milestone point for them on that journey to December. So we are seeing that, lots of lenders want to hit the ground running. They want to get the money in the door, or the money out the door, the applications in the door. And as a consequence of that, they're keeping their rates quite low. That was certainly the case on the residential side of things. Last week, we saw Halifax, we saw Leeds. They dropped their rates by as much as 0.35%. So, guys, we're seeing some reasonably attractive rates out there at the moment. Now, of course, on the residential side, we've seen some lenders are very aware of the potential stamp duty changes, specifically focusing on perhaps London and South East, where property prices are so much higher. The stamp duty changes are likely to change for first-time buyers on the 1st of April. That threshold that they have is likely to be dropped from 425 to 300. So lenders are very keen to get that application through the door with a view to completing by the 1st of April to save the client that £5,000 additional stamp. Looking at what notable changes we've had and notable rate reductions, we've seen two notable lenders reduce their rates, one being the mortgage lender. That's a subsidiary of Shawbrook Bank. They've reduced their rates by up to 0.2%. And so to Principality. Now, they've reduced their rates across their residential, their buy-to-let, and their holiday let ranges by up to 0.37%. So pretty serious reductions there. Guys, I'm sure many of you are involved in bridging finance too for properties that aren't immediately livable and lettable, or that you're intending to flip. We've seen Castle Trust reduce their rates by up to 0.2% across their whole range, with now rates starting at 0.75%. So that's the real changes in terms of rate. In terms of criteria changes, what have we seen? Well, we've seen West 1, and I don't know whether this is particularly relevant to many of you. I don't know if you're all investing in your local area or further afield, but if any of you are investing in Scotland, you'll know that Scotland is not quite as assisted or backed up with funding as much as England and Wales. Scotland is very much the kind of little sister when it comes to lending. We've seen another lender enter the Scottish market for buy-to-lets in that of West 1 Loans. Now, they're, of course, lending on normal buy-to-lets, guys, up to 80%, albeit, which is, a strong point, but they're also in the market for HMOs, multi-units, freehold blocks, holiday lets, expats, first-time buyers, foreign nationals. So, they do bring a lot to the table when it comes to, opening up their criteria to now encapsulate lending in Scotland. And we also saw last week a new buy-to-let lender come to the market. Now, they're called Moda Mortgages. They're a sister company of CHL Mortgages, a very well-established lender in the market. CHL have been in the market something like 20 years. And they opened their doors earlier this week. Their criteria is likely to be very similar to their sister company, focusing on buy-to-let landlords of all sizes, very large portfolios. They'll accept HMOs, multi-unit freehold blocks, that sort of thing. Guys, in terms of key dates for your diary then, which is something that I always like to focus on just to kind of get people's minds focused on the next kind of most important dates. Well, we've had the ONS statistics released today. Inflation has dropped back slightly. It was 2.6 to the 12 months till November. It was now 2.5 to the 12 months till December. Forecasts are that inflation will still sit above that government target of 2% for the rest of the year, but it's very good to see service inflation drop back and the overall inflation rate drop back to 2.5%. And then we've got the Bank of England Monetary Policy Committee. They'll be meeting on the 6th of February. Expectations in the market are that the Bank of England will drop back base rate. perhaps by 0.25%, with some lenders coming out and being particularly bullish. Santander came out, I think, yesterday or the day before, saying their focus, or their intention, their expectation rather, was that we'd see 4 base rate reductions this year. So, I guess we'll have to wait and see. Very quickly then, guys, in terms of headline rates, and these are only headline rates, but these are the cheapest rates that are typically available in the market at the moment. Of course, it's a smoke and mirrors game, as we all know with lenders. They'll give in one hand and they'll take away in another. So these rates invariably won't come with the cheapest arrangement fees, but that's just a good understanding of where the rates sit. So, 5-year fixed rates there, guys, between 3.9 and 4.78, not unpalatable at all. And certainly those 2-year fixed rates, somewhat cheaper too, 3.45 being the cheapest rate in your personal name, 3.65 being the cheapest interest rate for HMOs and multi-unit freehold blocks at the moment. Guys, it's relatively short and sweet for me. That newsletter that Sunil was mentioning that we publish every week, there's a QR code there for it if anyone wants to scan it and register. I think it's particularly useful. But if anyone does have any questions whatsoever, there are my contact details. I don't know if I have time to answer any questions now, but I'm here for the whole evening, so I'll be happy to answer some in the duration of the evening. That's it from me.
Brilliant. Thanks, Wayne. Appreciate all that. Lots of information there. So yeah, numbers in the chat. I don't know if you want to put that slide back on for a second. If you could just, if anybody needs that, please take a photo of that. And again, if you need any information of how to get hold of the team at DMI Finance, yeah, you can let me know and I will send the number to you. So is there any specific questions that anyone's got? Very quickly, we can take one question before we move on.
I have a question, if I can.
Yes, certainly.
Just a quick one. Hello, my name's Josh. With starting a limited company, I was wondering if you've seen any particular business accounts that have been shied away for the financing. I'm going to be opening up a business account, and I just wanted to make sure that I find one that's not going to cause me too much hassle when it comes to it.
No, so look, so long as they'll allow you to accept a direct debit, there'll be no issue whatsoever. Because of, I mean, look, I bank with Monzo, and I know when I set up my limited company, my SPV limited company account with Monzo, I had some real difficulties. A lot of these companies don't want you to set the company up until the entity owns assets. And that's half the problem. So what it might be, certainly from a lending perspective, you've got the company bank, you'll have no issue setting up direct debits for it. If you do struggle, because a lot of the banks want the cart before the horse, in the fact that you buy the property before you set up the company, which you're obviously not going to do, then it may well be, we always encourage people to say, look at somebody like Tide, one of these very quick online, not the best banks, but they will provide you with a sort code and account number. You can apply for the application, you'll get it there and then. And if it is that in time, in a month's time, once you've bought the property, you then go across to Monzo or Starling or Revolut or whomever else, you just do that. But if time is of the essence, then someone like Tide can do it very, very quickly. But no, you shouldn't have an issue in the long run.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, just great question. So if you need any help, just reach out, and then I don't know, we spoke at the last meeting about you wanting to sell, and then we do stuff, which is absolutely brilliant. So yeah, great. Thank you, Wayne. Appreciate that. If there's other questions regarding to finance, please put them in the chat. If we can't cover them in this evening, then again, one of the team will contact you in the morning and have a conversation with you. Welcome if you've just joined us. Jazz, good to see you. I haven't seen you for a long time, so yeah, Rick, good evening. Mike, Clive, good evening. If I missed anybody, Elena, good evening. I've been in business for a very long time, 3 decades plus in property. And I got to the stage last year where I felt that I needed some help to take it to the next stage. So my business consultant is here this evening as well. He doesn't just consult for me, he consults for other people. And he's helped me to see things differently, to see things in a different light, etc. But that's a conversation for another day. But it's more about personal development and making sure that we can serve and present information to you guys. So, like I said at the beginning, yes, I've been in property a long time, but we are still buying, we are still developing, still managing the properties, still refinancing. And as I was saying, got 4 or 5 remortgages going through next week. And then we do the next tranche of remortgages and doing various things. So it's still very, very active. Dan, are we okay to see if we can get some slides? Brilliant. So I was with Neil and Colin today. Neil's a local person, and he came to a meeting, come to our property meeting, which is great. And him and his dad, Colin, came and had a coffee for a couple of hours today. And Colin said one thing, which was, if you're having to change your business model, or because of the government will come and go, and new governments will come and go, but your business model should not be reliant on what the government does or does not do, which is very interesting. And I think Paul said something similar last week, that he follows what the government is doing because he'll rather be in a business what the government favour than not favour. So there are some big changes coming, and the reason I've decided to do renters' rights bill this evening is for one specific reason. The third reading was taken, or was happening yesterday. So what they originally said is that the whole bill, which has been going on it was in Conservative Party, and then it was going on for a while, that it will come in 25, maybe in the summer, maybe in the autumn. The current government have really pushed this through quickly, and it's saying that it needs to give the right renters, tenants, customers more rights, or bring things together. So the third reading took place yesterday. We think this is going to come in very, very quickly because it will get the royal consent, etc., and it will be law. So we have a window of opportunity as investors, as landlords, to understand what's going on and to adjust accordingly. So let me just move on to the next slide. As I said before, if there's any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'll try and move on my slides in a minute.
If you just click, you should be able to move to the next. There we go.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So one of the biggest things that is coming in is the abolishment of Section 21, no fault evictions. So at the moment, under the Housing Act, a landlord can serve a Section 21 notice to a tenant, and it's not just a request. The tenant should, by law, leave the property once that notice is served in 2 months, or within that 2-month period. So if we serve a notice today, by March the 14th, it's the 15th today, so one day before, that tenant should actually leave. The tenant often decides not to leave, and they're still in the property. But this gives us as landlords some certainty about how we can do things, about how we can bring our tenancies to an end. If we decide to sell the property, if we decide to do certain things, we have a tool there. And the government is saying that's really, really unfair to tenants. They want more certainty, etc. So what we're going to do is, you guys, landlords, we're going to take that tool away from you. And I know the law has already changed in Scotland, so, and it's not, I don't know if it's there or not, but in this situation, that tool that we have to serve a notice on a tenant, because we want our property back for whatever reason, will be withdrawn. Okay. The opportunity at the moment is, if you have a portfolio, review your portfolio. And this is only my opinion. That's what I've done. I've gone through my portfolio and looked at, do I want this tenant in the future? And will that tenant continue to stay with us? So if they've had rent arrears and we've said, oh, they always pay three weeks later, but they always pay for certain things, then we've decided, no, we're going to serve notice. And we've also spoken to our landlords and said, look, If you're happy with your tenants, great. If not, later it will be a lot harder to evict tenants.
Can I just make a comment there, Sunil?
Yes, please. Yeah.
You mentioned Scotland, and one of the reasons I popped along tonight, and also we've got Ashard Ali with us tonight as well, who's also a Scottish landlord. What many people won't be aware of is something very similar to the Renters' Rights Bill was introduced in 2017 in Scotland. We moved from the standard short assured tenancy to a new tenancy that in many ways represents what this new Renters' Rights Bill represents in England. And it's interesting because we've been living with this now for, almost a decade. And we can foresee, as landlords in Scotland, we can foresee all of the issues that this brings up. They are not quite mirror images of each other, but they're very, very similar. And if one was suspicious, as I sometimes are of the government, I would say that they use Scotland, and to a certain extent Wales as well, as the kind of testing ground for the new Renters' Rights Bill. So you've got at least two people in this room who are owners of the properties in the private rent sector and who have been living with the consequences of a bill very similar to this for, as I say, almost 10 years. So that might be interesting to actually get some feedback on what it's like when this is actioned and when it's real. I feel Scotland was almost used as a testing ground for this.
No, and that's brilliant. And I don't know if you want to. I mean, Helen, I think, is in Scotland as well. I know she's Scottish, but so she's here this evening, so I'm sure she's gone through the same thing. But Paul, if you want to, because you've got your own properties, haven't you? You've got your own portfolio of properties in Scotland.
Sorry. We started moving out of the private rental sector round about the same time as this, well, slightly before this bill came in. We started moving out in 2015. But just to give you a scale of our business, at its peak, we had over 100 tenants. So not a huge business, but a reasonable sized rental business. And now I can almost count them on one hand. And that's because partly because of the government's overall view of landlords, and I think we're all aware of what the government's view is of small landlords. I think most of us have experienced that.
Yeah.
And particularly since they changed it from a short assured tenancy, I always felt like a short assured tenancy, and the Scottish short assured tenancy wasn't hugely different than the English short assured tenancy. There were minor differences, but they were minor. I thought that was fairly balanced. There was rights for the landlord and there was rights for the tenant. And the new system that we have at the moment, or have had since 2017, is much more similar to the Renters' Rights Bill that you're now seeing, and is not in any way, shape or form could be considered balanced anymore.
No. And I'm glad that you're here and sort of giving us something that you've been through, which is great. So we will come back to questions in a little bit, but that was just to give you a bit of background. And Helen is here as well, so that would be great. So if you've got any questions in that respect. But Scott, Wales have already introduced different laws, and they introduced Rent Smart Wales, which is something I'll come on to, and they don't have tenancy agreements anymore. They have contracts with their tenants. So what the government is proposing is just periodic tenancies. So this gives the power to the tenant to go, well, I'm not in a year's tenancy. We as an agent have always done a year's tenancy, and it gave the tenant a lot of security because they weren't moving every 6 months. So we were offering them, tenancies on a yearly basis, but our tenants have been with us 10 years plus. So it's not like we wanted to get rid of them. The good tenants we've always kept. So the government is saying, well, if you have shorter tenancies, they just continue to roll. We actually thought that the government were going to introduce 2 and 3 year tenancies, which is what was proposed previously. But they're just saying it's a rolling periodic tenancy. You as the landlord cannot just evict them, do anything, give notice. The tenant can give you 1 month's notice and leave at any time. Yeah, so it's all, even the title of it, the renters' rights, it gives them the rights, not us as a landlord. The bill does outline that we have rights in terms of, I think at the moment on the Section 8 notice, there are 17, 18 grounds where we can evict a tenant if the tenant's paid late, if the tenant hasn't paid at all, some rent which is rightly due to the landlord has been withheld, etc., antisocial behaviour. All of those things we can serve notices and go to court and get that property back. What the government have now done is introduced more grounds. So there's now 32 grounds that they're proposing to say give us more. It looks like more rights, but the rights are not as what we would anticipate. So antisocial behaviour is in there, rent arrears are in there, and this is if the tenant does something wrong. So in principle, it sounds really good. If a tenant does something wrong, you can evict them. In practice, evicting a tenant is going to get harder because first of all, you have to prove it, and number two, you have to go to court. But that court process is going to be longer. So it's not just a case of under Section 21 at the moment, you don't even have to go to court. You serve your paperwork on the tenant. You then, if the tenant doesn't leave, you sit in your office, you complete the paperwork online. The court will sit in their chambers, or the judge, he will look at the paperwork. No one has to go to court. In the future, there will be court cases. You have to go to court. In London, this practice, the next one is the cap on upfront rents. And of course, there are a number of landlords, a number of companies, even letting agents who are saying, we will take a year's rent up front, we will take 6 months up front rent. And in fairness, back before 2019, before the tenant fee ban came in, if we thought a tenant was risky, we would say to them, would you like to pay more deposit? So we would take more deposit from them, and the tenant fee ban stopped us doing that because we could only take 5 weeks deposit. In this situation in London, a lot of the London and etc., they were paying, people would come in and say, look, I haven't got all my ID, I haven't got this, but I will pay you more money, or I'll pay you the rent up front. And we've had this situation here in Kent. People say we'll pay out rent up front. As soon as somebody says I'm going to pay rent up front, it just rings alarm bells to us as an agent, as a landlord, an investor. So yeah, they're saying that there is a cap on it. You cannot ask for upfront rent. So it's just 1 month in 1 month's rent, and that's it. You can't ask for a second month, third month, or 6 months, or whatever. So again, it's done to protect the tenant, and I don't think that's a bad thing, because the rent isn't due until each month comes in. So why should they pay up front? Again, this practice. The next one is bidding in certain areas, certainly in London, where there's a real shortage of properties. What you have is that one tenant will come in and say, oh, that property is £1,500. Another tenant goes, well, I'm happy to pay you £1,600. Somebody will say, I'm happy to pay you £1,700. And then the people are outbidded and etc. The rents go further and further up. So it's capping the rent in some ways, and it's a rent control in the back door, because then they're saying that the bidding process is not allowed anymore, or will not be allowed. So the rent advertised is the rent that will be on the tenancy agreement, and they can check this through. Trading Standards can go on Rightmove, check the rent, and they will check the rent then on the tenancy agreement, because they can request the tenancy from us as the tenant, sorry, us as the agent or the landlord, or they can request it from the tenants themselves. And it will only come to light when there's a problem. Tenant goes to environmental health or goes to Trading Standards or something, and at that stage they'll go, okay, let's look at the paperwork. How much rent did you pay up front? Did you bid? Was the rent correct, etc., etc. We, in some of our properties, if the landlord agrees, we do welcome pets. Going forward, we cannot discriminate against pets. Tenants will have the right to request permission for pets. This could breach leasehold agreements. So again, it's checking your leasehold if you have leasehold properties to see if you can have pets or not. And it's just trying to make it easier for what the tenant wants here. And this one here, in terms of decent home standards, decent home standards has been around a long time in terms of improving the standards of accommodation that the people get in the private sector. So they're looking at dampness, they're looking at handrails where people fall on the stairs, they're looking at making sure that the tenant has a better condition of home than they previously did. And now they're bringing it all into it. So if a landlord like us fails to do some repairs, then we could be prosecuted against this decent home because we failed to provide a decent home because we haven't done the repairs. So boiler repairs, etc. Again, the expectations are going to go up. Wales already have this one. So when I joined, I have two properties in Wales, and I had to become a member of Rent Smart Wales, and it's a database, and it was a fantastic database where they know the landlord, they know the property. You have to upload your gas certificate, your electrical certificate, your tenancy agreement. It's now a contract, but you upload everything onto this database. If there is an issue with that property, they know where the landlord is. They know if the tenant goes there, they can check all the information before coming to the landlord. I say it's brilliant because I haven't had any issues because I've done the exams that need to be done and the compliance that needs to be done, as well as upload all the information, and there's no issues. What they're trying to do is, by having a database, when a tenant goes and says to the council, oh, I don't have heating or I have a problem with my landlord, the first thing they will do once this system comes in, a database system then they will look on there to see if you as a landlord have been compliant. If you haven't been compliant, that's the first thing they're going to do. So why are you not compliant with the law? Because this will be law. As a letting agent, as an estate agent, we already have ombudsmen that we have to sign up to each year. And then there's a redress scheme where if a client wants to take it to the next stage, it's to the next stage. And they all try, the whole thing is demonstrating compliance. It's also making sure that they're tightening up on the industry and making sure that they get rid of rogue landlords. And that, for us, as the people here who are very active and good landlords, is good for us because there'll be more and more opportunities coming forward. But they can go on their database, they can look at that straight away and see, right, where is this? Oh, they don't have then they will request the information. Do you have a gas there, electrical there, etc., etc.? And there can be prosecutions if that hasn't been done. So before I carry on, are there any comments from anybody? Or Helen, Paul, hashtag, did you want to come in at this stage, seeing how it's done in Scotland before I go on? And I think there's a comment in the chat, Paul M. We've got Jazz, I know he's got properties in Scotland as well. So there's...
Yes, Sunil. As Paul mentioned, nowhere near as established as Paul was in the private rental sector up here in Scotland, but I'm actually in the process of exiting the buy-to-let market because a lot of, as Paul mentioned earlier on, a lot of what you're seeing or about to go through has already been in this space. And then if you look at the other pressures associated with the buy-to-let market, it just doesn't warrant the time and energy for the return for someone like myself as a business model, because you're right, you know, as Paul had said to you earlier on, if your business model, it needs to change because as a result of what the government's doing, well, you didn't have a robust business model to begin with, and that's what I'm finding is the case for myself with regards to the buy-to-let market.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for sharing that. Helen, did you want to come in there at all?
Hello, Sunil. Thank you for the opportunity to just contribute. Just agree with everything that Paul and Asad have just said. The rules that came in on the 1st of January 2017, we've been running with them for quite some time now. And like everything, you learn the rules of the business that you're operating in and you apply them to your business. It's the same with the changes to the serviced accommodation rules that we were given a couple of years ago now, and you learn those rules and you apply them to your business. I'm not going to say that it's going to be easy to continue as a landlord, but it's not going to be impossible either. You just have to review your business, have a look at where you're heading, what you want to achieve out of your business, the same as you would do all the time anyway. You are constantly reviewing where you are, where your business is heading, and what you want to be involved in. We have had an instance ourselves where we thought we'd signed up a tenant under the new rules, and we did our due diligence. We followed their reference checks and what have you, and a month later they handed in their notice, which they could do. They could give me 1 month's notice. So the day they signed their lease, they also handed me notice, and what they were doing was using my property as a very, very reasonably priced Airbnb. So that was the only thing that we became very aware of very quickly. And so you just close the gates where you can, but that one, the horse had already bolted. So yes, you live and learn.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing. And, you know, sort of, it's good to have people on here who've been through similar exercise, as Paul said earlier, that, you know, that it's been going on since 2017, which is great. Paul, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, just a couple of comments actually on backing up what Helen's saying. Basically, we've lived the experience for a number of years now, and they're not at all dissimilar. If you put the bills side by side, they're not at all dissimilar. And what we have found is, I mean, I'm speaking to landlords who have been in the tribunal system in Scotland trying to get tenants out who are not paying for over a year. Because remember that anytime you go to court or anytime you go to a situation where someone is judging something, that judgment can then be appealed. And people have learned very well how to play the system. And we're finding that some of the tenants in Scotland play the system better than the solicitors, and certainly better than the landlords. You know, Helen's just give you an instance there where they played the system. And, you know, I've been exiting the private rental sector for a considerable amount of time now. And one of the reasons for that is because I like a fair playing field in anything that I do. You know, I like to think the way I do business is fair, reasonable, and just, as it says above my desk. So we were involved in a van rental business at one point in time, and, you know, we could rent you a van and you could keep that van as long as you wanted it and keep paying us. But when we wanted it back, we could ask for it back and you had to give us it back. What they're doing now with the private rental sector is saying the tenant can stay as long or as short as they want to, and you can keep them unless we've got 18 grounds under which you can put a tenant out. But simply you don't want them to be there anymore isn't a good enough grounds. And that doesn't seem fair, reasonable, and just to me, that a tenant can leave at any point they want and give you a month's notice, but you have to keep them as long as they keep paying rent and looking after the property. And there might be a million reasons why you don't want that particular tenant, or you want to do something else with that property. And there's only 18 legitimate reasons that you can do that now. And taking away, you know, the whole Section 21, you can't simply tell someone that you don't want to supply them a service anymore. That is an unfair advantage to the customer. If I go into Sunil tomorrow morning and he becomes my agent to sell a property, and he, for whatever reason, doesn't want to work with me anymore, he's still entitled within his business to say, here's your money back, we don't want to work with you. As a landlord, he's not entitled to do that. It's a non-fair playing field.
Yes, absolutely. Because I think most contracts, if you look at business contracts, it's all to do with fairness on both sides. So that I would have the same rights as you do if we were in business and saying, well, you know, I do my bit, you do your bit, etc., etc. But this is very much, and that's why it's the tenant's rights. It doesn't say landlord rights. It doesn't say tenancy rights. It's really to do with the tenant and giving them more rights. and it has all changed. It definitely has changed, and we've been, ever since this was coming in, we've started reviewing our portfolio, started looking at things. We have served notices, we have served Section 21 notices, because we didn't feel that 2 or 3 of the tenants that we had going forward, it was going to be a problem. So now they've got to go and look for other accommodation. If the law hadn't changed, we would have probably continued with them, but we're protecting ourselves in that way. So, Imran, you've asked a question about students and how they pay up front. I haven't read the student bit in the Act because I'm not in student accommodation, but I think they may still have to pay on a monthly basis. But you're correct, if they're overseas people, or they get their grants, etc. But mum and dad will be guarantors, and maybe mum and dad will hold the money. But from a single letter or HMO point of view, it's a monthly situation.
Sunil,
Yes,
I think there is a clause in the Renters' Rights Bill that says you can't take advanced rent from the tenant stroke applicant nor anyone related. So in that particular scenario, we would be unable to take rent from, or let me rephrase, the guarantor, in this case, a parent, which by the way wouldn't really work because they are international students. So you wouldn't have a UK guarantor. It's highly unlikely you would have a UK guarantor. But if they did find a UK guarantor that was related, then as a landlord, we would be unable to take rent from them.
I agree with you, and I think maybe it was the way that I explained it, that maybe when the grant comes in, mum and dad or the guarantor will hold the rent and then pay it monthly rather than paying it all up front. So yeah, there are clauses in there that says that you cannot, even with deposits, it's the same situation. But yeah, sorry I didn't make myself clear. It was more to do with where is the money going to be held until it's rightly due, and then it gets paid.
And I think an important part about that is we're currently going through Parliament on this, and it's going through its readings. And if I remember correctly, that only came in as an amendment on the second reading. So as this is going through Parliament, it is getting tighter and tighter and tighter.
Yes, absolutely. And Rick, you asked the question about what if the tenant wants to pay up front. It is to do with the tenant paying up front, not the landlord. The landlord sometimes will demand and say, yes, I want rent up front. But even if the tenant wants to pay, the law says, or the law will say, no, you as a landlord cannot take that. Okay. And yes, it is going to affect a certain percentage, like you've just rightly said, somebody that's ill, somebody that's retired. We've got somebody that's today come through on an application on a house. They've got money, but they have a
like a CCJ or an IVA or something in the background, or
no, they're a retired person, but they've lost their marbles, and they've got an order,
like a power of attorney overseeing their affairs or something.
that the solicitor will pay the rent. So we've contacted the solicitor and said, send me the power of attorney. If it's correct, then we will take it, because the rent that is correct. The rent is being paid, but it gets paid on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
So yeah, we would not take a lump sum. We could take it today because we're allowed to, but going forward that won't happen. But we don't normally take upfront rents, and a lot of the London agents will look for that because it's great for their international investors, etc.
I think, Sunil, good evening, by the way, hello. I think what will happen is it will deter a lot of agents and landlords from having a mechanism to be able to consider these as applicants, whereas at the moment we would, because we've got certain amount of flexibility. But like I put in my comment there just now, with the universities and the students, if we can't get a UK-based guarantor, as I think it was Imran mentioned, it's not worth the paper it's written on. If it's an overseas national, which outside of UK jurisdiction, we've got no means of effectively holding them as a guarantor. So maybe it will shift the focus to perhaps the university having to come up with a solution there. Otherwise, most landlords won't want to touch international students because they're just too risky. So in order to continue to attract that money into the universities, surely the university is going to have to provide or create some kind of solution to that, which might be giving the ability to have something like a UK-based guarantor. And it might look something like, as we know it, Sunil, like a reposit or something like that. So they pay a token amount to it to be able to get that facility, perhaps. But I think this is going to put a lot of landlords off potentially from tenants that they would have otherwise considered in a reasonable manner.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's going to become even harder for some tenants, but we're looking for the right tenants, and we will find the right tenants going forward. And as I said, it's not. This doesn't really worry me. So yes, we're reviewing it all the time, but a lot of our tenants are staying a long time. So it's not like we want to get rid of them anyway. We don't serve that number of notices really. So it's only when the tenant has defaulted. So it's again exactly the same situation. But you're probably sitting there thinking, well, yeah, that's all very good what you've explained or what you've gone through, but how does it affect you, and how does it affect, and what can you do? And that's probably the most important thing. And Helen touched on it earlier about reviewing your tenancies. You know, and Paul touched on how they brought this in Scotland, etc. I've put there reviewing tenancy agreements. That's not just the tenancy agreement, that's all of the tenancy paperwork. So if you're not compliant now, it's going to get even harder. So if you need a compliance check, give me a shout. We can help out. We're looking at, you know, gas certs, electrical certs, EPCs. Everything must be in order for you going forward now. I would suggest it, and certainly in our business, we're reviewing every single file to make sure that when this comes in, at least we have done everything correctly. So review. And if there are certain tenants that you need to do something with, do it now. And if you need help with that, then again, I'm here to help you.
Can I make a point on that, Sunil?
Yeah,
you might
please.
find it, Sunil himself might find it interesting why I joined tonight on a renters' rights bill when I'm based in Scotland and I don't own any buy-to-let properties in England and have no intentions of buying any. So why would I be interested in the Renters' Rights Bill, and why have I read through the Renters' Rights Bill, and why have I followed the Renters' Rights Bill and looked at the amendments that went along? And I think the answer to that is because this is my profession. I've been in property for 3 decades, and this is my profession. And if you're going to take your profession seriously, then you should always be aware of things that have happened elsewhere. So, for example, I've found myself on social media forums talking about the Renters' Rights Bill for a couple of years now, and talking about how we have had something similar in Scotland since 2017. And the amount of people across the border who had no idea that our system was different surprised and shocked me. Because the United Kingdom is a small place, relatively. And what tends to happen in one place tends to happen in another place. If it's not immediately, it's soon afterwards. So if you're getting your expertise on the Renters' Rights Bill from somebody like Sunil on a Zoom meeting, then I would suggest that you're not taking your profession as a landlord professional. We should be aware and abreast of everything that's happening across the whole of these islands, because guaranteed what will happen in Scotland this year will happen in England next year, and what will happen in England next year will happen in Scotland the year afterwards, because that's how governments work. They always put, as anybody remembers, the poll tax. They tried that in Scotland. It didn't work very well, but they did try it in Scotland. If it would have worked in Scotland, you would have had it in England. So people might find it interesting. I don't own rental property in England and I don't intend to buy any, but I'm following the Renters' Rights Bill probably more closely than other people who have got 10, 15, 20 properties in England. This, ladies and gentlemen, is our job.
Yeah, no, good point. That we, you know, yes, I can only give an overview this evening. I can only make people aware to say, look, the Renters' Right Bill's coming in. We've been listening to the National Landlords Association, various other parties who've been campaigning against this. I didn't get involved in the campaigning this time when Section 24 was going to come into the Finance Act. Yes, I was very active because that was going to affect me majorly. This is going to affect me, but I did realise that no one was going to listen to what I was going to say at the government, and I was just wasting my time. But look, again, it goes back to financial reviewing, looking at the planning, looking at your portfolio. There are experts here. DMI Finance are here. You need to look at where the rentals are. What do you need to do? What can you do? Are your properties correct? Have you got enough margin? Why am I saying that? Because you may be with a tenant. Last year we had one tenant that didn't pay, and it took me 9 months to evict him under a Section 8 notice in Stoke-on-Trent, and I think the debt came at £5,000. Now that isn't major compared to the overall business, and I'm not, sort of thinking, well, that it's okay. It's not okay, but I know next year if that happened again, it could take me even longer to get that person out. And yes, some people may lose their job, and it may be quite genuine and things like that. But if there's some hints about people, it's just constantly reviewing paperwork, tenancy agreements, tenancies, finances, etc., etc. Reviewing portfolio, get help from an outside person like Paul. There's again other companies that would help you to look at the portfolio from an outside point of view. Stay informed. I think again, this point has been made this evening that it is our business, and the laws that will affect us are going to affect our bottom line. It's going to affect the way we deal with things, etc. Last year, for example, I had a letting agent come into me and said, "We've known each other for years. Can you just help me because I need to evict this tenant?" And he's a letting agent. He said, "It's okay. It's one of my own properties. Of course, I'll help you." So we sat down and we went through, and I said, "Look, send me your paperwork. I need to look at the paperwork because unless I've read the paperwork, I cannot give you the correct advice." So he sent me his paperwork, read through it. First thing is that he had taken a 6 weeks deposit previously, and in 2019 it should have been changed to 5-week deposit, and he hadn't changed his deposit, and because of that, the claim could be hindered in the way it moves forward. The important thing in here is that if, as a letting agent, he hasn't protected all of his landlord's deposit correctly, he could be under a big claim from any of those landlords because the deposit isn't protected clearly. So before 2015, 2010, we didn't have so many things as tenants, as landlords and letting agents to do. It was quite a simple process. We could let a property in a day, do some referencing, hand the keys over, etc., etc. Now we are doing about 17 items before we let a tenant into a property. Believe you me, I was given the job by the government to be a part of border control. Now, I never went for the interview. I never got the uniform or anything else. And they said to me, when anybody comes in to rent a property, what I want you to do, Sunil, is we want you to be border control. We want you to check their passport for us. So now I'm the frontline border control person. And if I decide not to do it as a landlord or a letting agent, they say, well, you're a bad boy and we're going to fine you, right? There's a fine if I don't do it. I didn't get a choice I didn't want that job. I still don't want that job to be border control, but I have to do it because that's the business I'm in. And again, I'll make a joke of that, but that's quite important that we do those roles that the government are introducing, and more laws are being introduced. But it's staying informed. All right, quite right. He said, yeah, this is just an overview this evening. The Act, I think, has 231 pages. Pull it out, go through it. What affects you? If it's student accommodation, yeah, then that's your bit. But knowing what to do is going to be important. Renters' right bills, decent home standards, which are covered, is going to be there. So looking at your portfolio now, planning for the future, if you've got major works coming on, budgeting it through, because you're going to need to do more for the properties. Repairs are going to have to be quicker, etc., because the tenants believe it or not, they're going to get even more rights going forward. So having a program of maintenance and looking at those is going to be really important. Policy updates. If you've got policies within your business, it's updating them and making sure that this complies. If you've got members of this team, the staff, they also need to understand what's going on in the future. Just 1 second as the slide changes, but I'm happy to take questions as the slide stops. So if there's any questions or if anybody wants to make any comments, I'm happy to do that while I read the chat as well. Anybody want to come in? No.
Sunil, question.
Yes, Imran.
With what we've discussed and with what's upon the horizon, you're obviously engaged in the sector. Are you seeing a lot of newbies coming in and wanting to be landlords? Are you seeing a lot of existing landlords still expanding their rental portfolio in the UK?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I can only give you from a very minor or a small point of view, which is here where we are, and we've seen an increase of landlords selling. And maybe they would have sold in 5 years and now they're selling now, but we've seen more people, landlords exiting the market. And we do specialize in then trying to sell that property onto another landlord or an investor, of course, because we're going to then try and get that commission to continue to move forward. So, and there are people joining the market still. There are people exiting the market, as always, people joining the market, as always, because still they're thinking, well, we don't know about the 177 laws that us landlords and more landlords are affected by. 170 laws, they don't know all the laws. They just think, they see, yeah, I can rent this property out, it's passive income. They've been on a course and it looks quite good. And I'm not saying it's not good because, you know, we've all earned a very good income out of it. But yeah, we're seeing people exiting as well as joining. But in London, I think what you're getting is the international investors are leaving in droves because the taxes aren't beneficial. But that's from a tax point of view rather than from a legal point of view, as in renters' right bills or anything like that. I hope that answers your questions. And what's your view, Imran?
So I operate predominantly in London, central and greater, and I can certainly tell you there is an exodus of domestic landlords. I think we all agree there. There is also, like you said, a bit of an exodus of international landlords. However, what I'm also noticing is because there are bargains to be had, quote unquote bargains, there's a new generation or a new kind of international investor that's buying in London at the moment. These guys, in my opinion, and I might be generalizing here, they're not fully aware of the impact of the new bill on their asset or assets that they're looking to buy, but they're certainly looking at London as a long-term store of wealth. And one of the reasons for that could be that these monies are coming from countries where inflation is practically out of control. So even though the yield in London might be sub 3.5%, sub 4%, for them, that's still a good deal than keeping the monies in their resident country.
Can I just, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, Imran, that's brilliant, and thank you for that. You know, insight into what you're seeing where you are, and if anybody else is in anywhere else, yeah, love to get your views. But Paul,
this kind of borders on a conversation me and Ashard were having recently. You know, there's an American adage that says, "Don't wait to buy real estate and wait." Right. In other words, buy property and just wait and the value will go up. And I've always believed that that's true, generally speaking. I mean, it's not every property across the UK. It's not even every property in London. But if you buy correctly and you have time on your side, you're likely to make money from property. However, the concept behind that is that you have the money to buy. You have the £100,000, £200,000, £300,000, £400,000 to park, like some of these foreign investors do. They're not coming over here and looking for mortgages where they don't know where the mortgage rate's going to be, you know, next week, let alone in 5 years' time, right? They're actually spending their own money. And there's a huge difference being involved in property and speculating on property if you're speculating with all of your own money than speculating with borrowed money, because that brings another difficulty, shall we call it, being kind, right, into the situation. And investing with your own money is one thing, which is what international investors tend to do. Investing with other people's money, whether that be JV money or whether that be institutional money, when you're having difficulties from a legislation point of view, when you're having difficulties from an interest rate point of view, and when you're having difficulties from a tenant's right point of view, right, and a tax point of view, that just makes for a very difficult business. It might make for a good investment if you have a spare £1 million sitting in the bank, but it doesn't make necessarily for a great business if you happen to have £100,000 sitting in the bank.
Yes, agreed. Brilliant. Any other comments from anybody? Please feel free to unmute and contribute. Thank you, Paul, for that. Thank you, Imran, for what you said. Helen, thank you for your comments earlier. But what's worrying people? Is it worrying? Do you just think, well, yeah, it will just pass and I'll just continue as I am? Are you going to change strategy? What are people's thoughts?
Sunil, hello, everyone.
Jazz, good evening.
How you doing?
All right, you?
Yeah, it's really good to see you, Sunil. It's been a while. Happy New Year. I just wanted to chuck my hat in the ring, and I completely agree with everyone's comments, especially Paul. Hi, Paul. I'm actually originally from Denny. So between Glasgow
I'm in Lindsay at the moment, so I could have thrown a stone at Denny.
So to give you a background, guys, my family originally from Scotland. So we've got some quite a few investment properties in Scotland since the 1986, 87 era. When my parents moved from England up to Scotland, we stayed there for quite a while, and we amassed some ex-local authority properties, which are mainly like 4-in-1 blocks. So you've got 2 flats on the bottom, 2 flats above. And subsequently, as I've got older and invested in property down in the south in Kent where I live, you know, I bought property. This was all before Section 21. So, sorry, Section 24, no, Section 20. And what's happened is now, from a tax point of view, Paul, I completely get that. And since 2017, we also had the rent cap introduced in Scotland, so you couldn't increase your rent by more than 3%. Now, if you've had most of our properties were mortgaged with BM solutions at very low rates, at less than 2%. And as they've gone up, we can't increase our rent fast enough. So as and when tenants have moved out from our resi properties in Scotland specifically, we've just been selling them. And most of the solicitors in Scotland, for those that know, solicitors and estate agents are all under one roof. So as the tenancy comes for renewal, it's like, yep, new carpet, liquor paint, get rid of it. Because, you know, where we were netting something like 6-7% net per annum, that's just, you know, it's just, you're better off just putting in that money in a savings account now, you know, especially when it's not owned in your personal name. So, Sunil, going back to your point about the portfolio review, it's so important to get the metrics right on the finance point as well. Completely agree. And from a solutions point of view in Kent, specifically where I invest, most of the single lets that I have in my personal name, they are now, they have to be back with a guarantor, and or if they can be converted into a HMO, I'm converting them. And the only reason being is because I want my tenants to be more transient. So I don't want them to be there for 3, 4, 5 years, because I want to make sure I can get that property back when the renters' right bill does come through. So that's just my opinion. So nice to see you guys.
No, thank you for your input, and yeah, it's good to see you. And I think it's good to what you're saying there, that your model is that you want your properties back.
Can I make a point, Sunil? I remember kind of, you know, and I have been what some people class as anti-buy to let for a considerable amount of time. I've been in the industry for 30 years, and I believe people like myself and probably people like Jazz and his parents had the best of it. I don't know why I would stick around for the worst of it, but that's a different story. But I remember discussing on Clubhouse a couple of years ago with a couple of very adamant London investors that much stronger legislation would come to England, and they said, no, that'll never happen in England. And most of that stuff that they said would never happen in England is happening in this bill right now. In fact, it was interesting, they're on a Clubhouse fairly recently talking about the bill. The same people who said this stuff would never happen. And one of the things they said that would never happen in England, right, is rent caps. As I said to you, I follow property and study property across the UK. The fact that I'm based in Scotland doesn't mean I've only ever worked in Scotland, and doesn't mean that I don't study the whole of the UK. And what the governments tend to do, or local authorities tend to do, is they try something, and if it works in one area, they move it to another area. Rent caps have been in Scotland for some time, and I predict, and I don't like predicting, one way to make a fool of yourself is make a prediction, but I predict that in the foreseeable future, you're going to see some kind of rent cap in the Renters Reform Bill, either now or as an amendment later. When the government tells you how much you can charge for your product or service, it's time to get a new product or a new service.
I agree with that comment. Could I make another comment just to add to that?
Yes, certainly.
I would say, as a landlord in London, that regardless of whether they introduce rent control, we're already at that tipping point where, from an affordability perspective, many tenants simply can't afford for rents to go any higher. So I think if they do introduce rent control, that would be purely optics. From a market perspective, the market simply can't sustain any further increases. My tenants, I do my best to look after them, and they are slightly under market rent. But if I did start charging them real market rent, they wouldn't be able to afford it. They'd probably still agree to stay because they have no other alternative. But I can almost guarantee within 6 months, they will start defaulting.
Yeah.
Taking that one step further, the points that sort of Jazz made and I made, and also Paul Merrick earlier on, I work as actually, which is someone that I suppose you could call it a posh accountant, some would say, or someone that looks at the long-term future for the sort of FTSE 100 companies like Aviva. And based on the analysis that I've been doing with regards to the portfolio and all these competing, you know, buy-to-let really is a margins game. And it seems like where the interest rates are going with the banks, I think, Wayne, you were kind of sharing those earlier on. And even there, you were saying how this isn't the full story because there's arrangements fees in and around it and behind it. And you can see how an arrangement fee could wipe out a full year's worth of rent from some of the properties that are going on. And then are you just playing catch up, trying to increase your rent, which is beyond the means of the tenant? And now if you can't remove the tenant because those rights have gone to get someone else in, are you just left to fork out money? And 75% of your portfolio belongs to the bank for some people, unless they're lucky few that have got their own money and just deposit that in. Where would that then leave you? So, you know, when you do the maths, it's just not making any sense anymore. So I just wanted to kind of share that. I don't want to be doom and gloom, but I think it's important that I share, I suppose, some of the pain that I'm going through and what I'm seeing. And remember, guys, we're, as Paul Eric mentioned, we're 10 years into this. I only came into the buy-to-let sector 5 or 6 years ago. I've created a 7-figure property portfolio, but it feels like a seven-figure monster that I'm now going to have to deal with and unpick and trade out of, where I won't really get much out of it at the end of it.
I think the market conditions are really interesting. Imran's point about the market conditions, I'm going to tell you an anecdotal story. We made a choice not to put any of our tenants out to sell properties. That's not a clever business move. It's just a fairly reasonable kind of, if you like, moral move, that we wouldn't choose to push a tenant out to sell the property. But as the properties have been becoming empty, the same as Jazz, we've been putting them up for sale. And we had an incident round about Christmas time there where a property came available, and the one sister was moving on because she found a boyfriend and she was moving in with her boyfriend. So that was great. We could sell the property because she'd been with us for a number of years. And her sister came to us and said to her, "Can we rent the property?" And I gave her the figure that would make financial sense for me to hold on to that property in the 21st century. And it was almost twice the market value rent, because that's the only way it could work for me. And she said, "No, I can't afford that." And I said, "Fantastic." It was a very nice way of saying we don't want you as a tenant. But I actually just gave her the facts of what would make financial sense for us to retain that property and be a landlord.
Yeah. No, it's been really good examples. Thank you, everybody. I've got about 3 or 4 minutes left. If you've got any comments or any questions, then put them in the chat. So I think, was Wayne still there? I don't know. Good. Yeah, Wayne, I'm going to come to you in 1 minute, if that's okay. Give you a couple of minutes just to have a quick think. How are you finding what Imran was saying about how we're finding London, how we're finding in Kent? How are you finding it in your area? With the not you don't have an area because you deal with.
We don't have an area. Yeah.
I'll come back to you in 1 second, if that's okay.
Of course.
Yeah. I believe that rent caps have already been introduced in this bill, but they're disguised. Okay. Now, the fact that tenants cannot bid each other is one way. And the second way is that they're saying that a landlord can charge market rent. Now, if you charge more than the market rent, oh, you're a bad boy, let's penalise you. Yeah, but the other costs will go up. Letting agents' costs may go up, materials, labour, and all of those things can go up. But they're saying, no, it's a cap because I can't do that. So in this particular area, I'm very, very fortunate because we have in a small 2-mile radius, we have a good density of rental properties that family homes operates or lets for other landlords and ourselves. And we, over the last 10, 15 years, have been very fortunate to go, when a property comes back, we'll add on £25, we'll add on £50, we may add on £100, and the market is moving. And it's fantastic because as the market moves, the properties I own, the rents are also going up. And in a small area, I can influence the market. It's not like London in around where, it's very wide. I'm in a little village or a little town where I can do that. I won't be able to do that in the future. And that's a rent cap without calling it a rent cap. So I believe rent caps already, they're there.
When you read that clause, quite an interesting clause that. When you read that clause, right, it's market value, right? Market rent value. What they're not defining in there is what they're classing as the market. So therefore, if you start to bring local authority housing, which is always cheaper than the private rental sector, and you take that into that equation, then that takes the whole rental down. So while they're talking about market value, they haven't defined in the Renters' Rights Bill what that market is. So that market could be housing associations, that market could be social housing, that market could be local authority housing. And if you throw all of that into the mix and say, well, the average rent is the private sector's X and the public sector's Y, and we take the average of those and that's the rent, it's likely to bring the private sector down, not take the public sector up. Yeah, so it's a very clever way of bringing in a rent cap without putting a particular number on it.
Yes, absolutely. And I was at a presentation back in November time, and the legal person from Rightmove was there, David Cox, and he was saying that they have been approached by trading standards and various other bodies, and trading standards that come along, and they have asked for data under the Government Acts. They have asked for data that's there. They have the power to look at so much data, because every property that goes on Rightmove, they can combine all that information on Zoopla and all that. They can get all that data, and they get an exact rent for an exact street or an exact area and say, well, that is the rent. And then if you try and now go, okay, I'm going to go above that, then there must be justification. I'm going to look for the justifications, by the way. I've got better property than the market, or whatever that justification is. But yeah, that's what's going to happen. But anyway, in closing,
surely, Sunil, maybe a couple of like-minded local letting agents might have to agree what the market value is. Surely,
yeah.
Just saying, we might have to get our heads together and determine what is the new market rent, factoring all of the implications of the Renters' Rights Bill in place. Like I mentioned earlier, if you've got no ability to go above a certain cap, all that's going to happen is you set your cap high as you can initially, and people will bid up to that. I believe that is still acceptable, but what they can't do is bid over that price. So in most markets, if there's an increase in cost or whatever of bringing a product to the service, or risk of bringing that product to the service, to the market, you are just going to factor that into the price of your product, are you not? So yeah, rents are just going to keep rising as far as I can see.
The problem with that theory is, right, that if you take the public sector, the private sector, good quality housing and average quality housing, good quality finishes and low quality finishes, you're actually going to race to the bottom.
Yeah.
Because what happens then is there's no incentive for a landlord to spend a lot of money on a property. If you take that combined number, right, and it comes up with a number of, let's say, in an area where you might think a property is worth £1,800, £1,900 a month, but the caps rent, what they perceive to be the market value, is £1,400 a month, because they're taking the lowest denominator and the highest denominator, and they're coming up with an average. Then there is no incentive to make very nice properties to get that extra, that extra bit of rent. So it's interesting how it's going to affect the market generally. But the idea that a couple of agents can set the market value, they can set the private sector market value, but they can't set the public sector market value.
I agree.
So,
I was being slightly facetious there, Paul. It's a nirvana if we could taint and influence the markets. But I think between us, when they used to do the broad market area for the LHA rates and all the rest of it, it is important that us as landlords and letting agents with larger portfolios and this combined group do put that data across when asked for it, so it supports that. Otherwise, as you say, it's going to sink to the lowest common denominator of the information that they do receive. So we have a duty to keep feeding into that and keeping it current and as up to date as we can, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. And as if you're a landlord here, use a letting agent. Doesn't have to be necessarily us. I would recommend you use us, but if you want to use another letting agent, a letting agent will get you more rent, and that's probably going to be important at the moment to get that secured in.
Yeah.
Alan made the point earlier, which said, get to know, and I think Paul's made the same, get to know the law, because you're going to need that, and making sure that the law is there and how you play the game. Alan has also said that risk surveyors will be appointed if there's a rent challenge, etc. So it's important just to get the rents right. Do not be frightened. Continue to increase. We are doing a major rent review at the moment to go through and get these rents increased, because we know what the law is at the moment.
Can I promote a question? Because me and Ashard come on tonight for this simple reason. So I've not been asked this question, but I'm going to promote somebody to ask a question around this. We've been living with this, as I say now, for almost a decade, and they're very similar bills. They're not the same. We can pick differences between them, but they're very similar bills. Here's the question I expected. what's been the toughest thing about it, Paul? What do you find that makes it difficult or unworkable? Would it be interesting for me and Ashar to kind of explain, as people who
Yes.
have been living with this,
Yes.
what we found makes it difficult? Yeah.
Yes, I did. Yeah. Could I just come back to you, Paul? Because I think I said to Wayne, could you just hold on? He's been waiting. Because I just wanted to cover Imran's first question, which was around how are you finding it in the markets that, or the landlords that you serve, Wayne.
Mhm.
And then we'll come back to that question. And I think it's also, you know, we can't increase the rent, but they want the housing standard to increase. And I think Cameron, good to see you this evening, has made that point that housing standards will, you know, want increase in housing standards, but you can't increase the rent. But Wayne, how are you finding the big portfolio of landlords that you deal with?
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, as you know, Sunil, we used to be very focused on London, the Southeast, advertising at Emerson's for 20 years and, you know, many of the central London auctions. And, you know, it's certainly been, we still do good volumes in London, Southeast, Southwest, but we've never really had a particular focus on any given area. I would say that there is a significant drive north. Simply put, lower yields or lower values, higher yields. You can certainly see the kind of motivation for doing so. In terms of our clients, look, we have seen landlords exit the market, but I think it's a point of, you know, as Helen said, adapting to the times. And, you know, it depends where you are in that cycle. A lot of people have made their money and are happy to get out. A lot of people still want to make money. I still think there is good money to be made. So, you know, perhaps changing their tax post Section 24, buying properties in company structures, buying perhaps more high yielding assets, stripping some of their assets that they think they've seen, you know, better days of. I mean, for example, our largest client, who has 400 buy-to-lets, and okay, it's scales of economy, but he does continue to buy in London. Now, you know, there is a strong argument that it is very much scales of economy, that he can certainly, he has far deeper pockets than most of us, and he can take far lower cash flow. But no, I mean, you know, on the whole, it's a move north. But generally speaking, we haven't seen a tremendous amount of our clients, and we've been trading for 22 years, exit the market as a consequence of these changes. Of course, we've, you know, had many clients over the years you know, exit the market, but not significant volumes. But, you know, only time will tell, I guess. And, you know, Paul and the guys have seen this for the last 10 years. Maybe in 10 years' time, it'll be a different story. And like Paul says, I'm not one for making predictions. But yeah, maybe time will say a different story. But as things stand, no, we're, you know, no significant changes.
No, that's good to know. Is that, you know, yeah, people are going to go through it. Maybe they're not aware of what's going on, or they haven't, you know, gone through the stuff. But I know your landlords are fairly active, so it's good to know that people are going to go through and continue as we are. Paul, could you pose that question again? Because I think that is a good question. Yeah, and it's like you're saying, it's surprising that it hasn't been posed. And maybe yourself, Imran, Helen, any hashtag, sorry.
I'm going to quickly address what Wayne just said, though. I think, Wayne, at the moment, this is a white paper, and I don't know how many people are as boring as me. You know, I'm the person who reads manifestos at election time. It's me. You know how they put out all those thousands of manifestos. It's actually me that reads them, right? Because I don't know anybody else that does. But people don't tend to read white papers. People tend to worry about legislation when it's active and when it's in, right? So I think once this is active and in, it's been around for a couple of years south of the border, we will really see how big that exodus is, and we will really see what people's attitude to this is. At the moment, I think if I stopped 10 landlords on the street in the middle of London or Birmingham or Manchester and said, quote me the Renters' Right Bill, they'd get 2 paragraphs perhaps, and I'm being optimistic. So let's see when they actually live with it, and we live with it. Not the Renters' Right Bill, but something similar. To answer that question that nobody asked Sunil, right, is they just changed the goalposts. And when you go out to play football, and I'm never a very good footballer, you need to know where the goalposts are. And if every time you kick the ball, they keep changing the goalposts, at some point in time, you just walk off the pitch. And what they're doing in property at the moment is they're constantly changing the tax goalposts. They're constantly changing the legislation goalposts. They're constantly changing the interest goalposts. And unlike some people in this room, right, I don't have an axe to grind. I'm not here because I'm selling you X or Y. I'm here because we've lived this experience. I came to this room tonight and spent an hour and a half of my Scottish time telling you about your English bill because we've lived with it. And it's not hell, but it's damn close.
Thank you. Thank you for posing the question and answering it, Helen. Any thoughts as we close? I think, oh yeah, let me try and take you off mute.
I was just trying to find the unmute button again. No, I think Paul has wrapped that up very nicely. What I was going to say is you have a window of opportunity at the moment to look at your leases, the way that you're doing at the moment, Sunil, to look at, to encourage landlords to look at their tenants, to see if the right tenant is in the right property at the right price. You've got a window of opportunity, and that is now. And so take that window of opportunity, review everything that you have as your stock, and that is your property and your tenant. And if you don't like what you're looking at, then now is the time to change that. I think, Paul, I'm right in saying that we did have a landlord who used the clause of selling their property to evict a tenant, and so they gave that as their reason, wrote out to their tenant terms of conditions and what have you, and said that they were selling the property. That tenant found it again on the Rightmove portal and on the Gumtree portals, and they're now in court. So learn what is happening, know your rules, know your regulations, know your responsibilities, and act accordingly. It is a business, and be business minded and treat it as a business, and firm and fair, always firm and fair. So, and I don't think you can go wrong, but don't try and twist the wording in order to suit you and try and put a square peg in a round hole. That's not going to work. Be very, very clear about what you want, and be very clear about your expectations, and then everybody is maybe going to operate from the same page. And do that with pets as well. If it's coming, you are going to have to take a pet in your property. Be very clear about the kind of pet that you're going to allow in your property. Otherwise, you might end up with a llama. So, you know, forewarned, forearmed, and all the rest of it. It's been a really good conversation and discussion this evening. Thank you very much, Sunil.
No, thank you. And as I said, you know, between you, Paul, Ashtrad, I've gained a lot of information about, you know, how it is, and it helps me to understand, and I hope it's been helpful for other people.
Just on that.
I think Elena
Yes.
wants to. Sorry, I think Elena wants to say something.
Thank you.
Yes.
Is that okay?
Yes. Yes. Sorry,
Thank you.
I didn't see you. Good
Sorry,
evening.
may I ask Helen a question, or for something that I didn't quite understand, Helen? Can you take your mute off?
There we go.
Yeah. Hi, Helen. Good evening. Thank you very much for those words. You know, you were saying about a landlord who said to a tenant that they wanted to sell, and were they? What was your point there? Did the landlord really want to sell?
No, they didn't. They wanted rid of the tenant.
I see.
Was the bottom line, and they thought that using that clause, that rule, as a reason to evict them was going to allow them to move the tenant swiftly along, and then they would rent the property out again. So don't misuse the rules and the regulations. Apply them accordingly, apply them correctly. Yeah, otherwise you are going to end up in the soup. So
Helen, can I just ask you a question related to that?
Sure.
If the landlord wanted to move into the property, perhaps it had been their former home or whatever, and that was genuine.
Yes.
Do you see that it's going to still be tricky to do that? I know that it might be one of the clauses, but do you think that they could get it back fairly smoothly, or would it be very difficult?
that's an it depends question, and it depends if you have had all your ducks in a row. And this is where you start this now. I'm sure you've been doing it all along anyway, is that you have every single piece of paper that you're required to have. You have every single test that you're required to have. You have every single bit of, you follow all the rules and regulations, in other words. So if you need your landlord certificate for a gas safety certificate, you have it. You keep yours on file. Because if you say, oh no, I've lost that, they can dig back in. The plumber keeps a copy as well. Somebody has a copy of that. And if you didn't do it, sorry, it will get kicked out and you will be on a hiding to nothing. So make sure all your ducks are in a row, get all your paperwork done and tick every single box. It's your responsibility. As a good landlord, that's what you're going to be doing. As a good business owner, that's what you're going to be doing. But if you want to move back into the property, that we do have, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, but we do have a reason that you can move back into the property if you need to, or if a member of your family needs to move into that property. It does just take time, and you just go through all the steps and make sure your paperwork's in order and that you write out to them with the correct information when you give notice.
Thank you. Do you think that those clauses, I think that there are 18, somebody mentioned here, and the clauses that a landlord can gain possession of their property, do you think that that there are some that are going to be, you know, easier to get through and some that are going to be more tricky? I mean, for example, you know, do you think the rent arrears thing might be more tricky and more time consuming going through the courts? And
absolutely more difficult, more time.
What's the easiest?
More possibly. The easiest is the one that actually applies. The easiest is the one that strictly and honestly actually applies, and then you just go down the road.
The rent one's an interesting one. I don't want to run this too long.
Thanks,
but
Helen.
The rent one's an interesting one because they're allowed to be in a percentage of arrears in both bills. They're allowed to be in a percentage of arrears. So what we are finding in Scotland is the very clever tenants, right, are not paying you everything they owe you. They're just paying you enough, right, to show that they're making gestures of paying. And doing that, they stop you from evicting them. The three simple ones, there are three simple ones. One, you're going to sell the property, right? But you must be, as Helen says, genuinely selling it and prove that you've sold the property, right? Two, or attempted to sell the property. Two, that you're moving back into the property yourself and you must move back into it and it must be your home, not another home, right? And three, that a member of your family is going to move into it and it must be their primary home as well, right? What I will say is that there is a whole list of boxes that you need to tick and make sure you've ticked, right? But we're both singing from the same hymn sheet tonight, Helen. Isn't that a nice change, right? There's a whole bunch of ticks that you must make, right? And if you get one of those ticks wrong, you've got a tenant for life. Or as long as they want to be there.
That is
they don't have to get anything right. You just have to get something wrong.
Correct. Yeah.
So yeah, fantastic points there. Helen, meet Elena. Elena, meet Helen. You're both quite interesting. You're both teachers and things like that. So quite amazing how you both come together on this platform and how you picked Helen. I don't know. Maybe it's just me thinking that. So, we are going to close in 1 minute. Cameron, thank you for joining us this evening. I think, can you just elaborate on your point where you're saying about it's sad about you cannot increase excellence in the property, because I think that's a really good point. Can you yeah, thank you.
Hi, good evening everyone. It's lovely to be with you, Sunil. Thank you. Well, I have a number of buy-to-lets in very close to central London, and these are high-value properties. And fortunately, I've had them for the best part of 20 years. If I were to own them today, like Imran has already said, it wouldn't have worked. So the time has been on my side. But moving forward, I'm thinking, because my strategy with buy to let is offering high spec properties to international clienteles, and sometimes to indigenous professionals. With the first category of people, I wouldn't have any problem because I don't think they fall into the new rules and regulations, because majority of them are done through company let. With the second category, I'm sitting here thinking, what incentive would I have to offer good quality, high spec properties if the authorities are going to come back at me and say, well, this property that you put in the market for, say, for example, £3,000 per calendar month, in our opinion, is not justifiable, because 2 doors or 3 doors further down the same road, there's another property that is available for £2,000 a month. And somehow I'm going to get penalized, even though there's no comparison in terms of specification between my property and the other property further down the road. So basically, I think Paul has already alluded to this. Officially, there is no rent cap, but in essence, there's going to be, because everything is going to be averaged out, and the unintended consequences of that is that, unfortunately, from the tenants' perspectives, the standards are going to be lowered, because as far as the landlords are concerned, there is no incentive. Why would I go and spend the money and offer high spec properties when that effort is not going to be acknowledged or appreciated financially? So that's the point I was trying to make this on it.
Yeah, no, and a very valid point as well. I was going to thank you and go, no, I wasn't going to thank you. I am thanking you. So I appreciate you being here, and just thank you for your comment there. I was going to go to Wayne and ask the question about how all of this relates, how the mortgage industry, or how the mortgages will be affected. And then Caroline put the question in the chat about, well, what if, repossessions, etc. Never get repossessed. If you're in that situation, seek help early, speak to the lender, go through. And I know that's not what your point was there, Caroline, but Wayne, did you want to come in on that one before I close?
Yeah, well, I guess the big thing will be that affordability will be tighter and tighter, won't it? I mean, we've really seen that if we take back in the day, you could get 125% rent cover, probably at an interest rate of 5%. Affordability, it was very easy to stretch back in the day to 85% loan to value on most buy-to-lets. Then, circumstances changed. Section 24 came in, as we know, since probably 2009, the mainstay of borrowing has been at 75% loan to value. In any case, in many areas of the UK, achieving 75% on anything other than a 5-year fixed is particularly tight and particularly difficult to get. So I think the one thing that will happen is, if rents don't keep following that trend up as values increase, loan to values are just going to have to drop, and the ability to secure that higher loan to value funding is going to diminish.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you, everybody, for this evening. You've heard from various parties. We only decided to do this topic yesterday because the reading had got to stage 3, and you've heard from Helen, which I haven't spoken to in a while, what her views were. So there's not me saying to Helen, "Oh, can you come on this and just give her your, tell them this," because I didn't even know what Helen was going to say, Paul was going to say. I didn't know what anybody was going to say this evening. I didn't know what Wayne was going to say, let alone I didn't know what I was going to say. So it's really, really interesting that people have got their view, and we're all saying the same thing, is review the paperwork, make sure, as Helen says, that all your ducks are in line. If you need help, reach out now. This is the window of opportunity. There are 2 opportunities. Number one is getting the tenant situation right, or getting the tenants out that you don't necessarily want. And the second opportunity is looking for those properties with tenant issues, and there will be more issues. And I believe that there is going to be a big market in there where the property needs to come back to the owner and they can't do anything with it. And that's that there are going to be opportunities. There always is opportunities, and it's education and looking at those opportunities. But review, review, review. Great. Thank you very much for this evening, and we will catch you very soon. If you need anything, my number's in the chat. If I've missed your question, apologies. But you know where I am, and you know where my colleagues are, my friends. So if you just reach out, and we're Clubhouse Friday 7:30. See you soon. Take care.